Hello, welcome to episode 185. Not 185 last time, like Oscar mentioned. Call it that. I actually didn't even notice it, Oscar, I'll be honest.
Yeah, my bad, everyone. I got the numbers wrong.
We're confusing people. I'm Brad Nye. This is co-host Oscar Minks. Um, how's it going?
Going good today, man. How are you doing?
Not too bad. It's staying relatively cool. Only mid 80s, so I'll take it.
Yeah, I got your heat now. It's 90s all weekend down here again, and humidity's rocking about 80+%. So
Yeah,
lovely,
that's no
lovely
fun.
outside. Yeah,
Not a lot of fun. So
yeah,
I guess we'll just
for
jump
sure.
right into it today. Um,
Let's do it.
we're gonna we're going to talk about how do we secure the workforce in a post-COVID world, um, and a lot to talk about there. But first, a couple of news articles. The one I found on GB Hackers is Cisco Nexus dashboard flaw lets remote attacker execute arbitrary commands. So that's no fun. They actually released 45 vulnerabilities uh, by Cisco, but one was critical, 3 high, and then 41 were medium. But that critical rated is a 9.8 with no workarounds available. At this point, haven't seen any exploits in the wild, but keep an eye out for patch on that one as soon as you can. There is the arbitrary command, a cross-site request forgery vulnerability, and container image read-write vulnerability. So attackers could upload containers to the Nexus dashboard.
Have they released patches for that one yet, Brad?
Yeah, so it's a dashboard 1.1 was affected. Dashboard version 2.21e has been released with fixes. So get your stuff patched, get up to date.
Yeah, very cool. Glad to hear the patches are out. Sorry, I had to plug in my headset there. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. It's just always interesting when we see such a high volume of vulnerabilities publicly disclosed at the same time. Makes me believe they've probably known about these for a little while and kept them in their
Yeah,
back pocket and have been working through those remediation steps.
yeah. It was done as part of internal security testing by the ASIG, Cisco's ASIG. So
Cool.
they found those vulnerabilities reported on internally. So
Yeah. Well, good for them. And, for the folks that may not be aware, like the Cisco Nexus dashboard, right? That's like a control center for your network. Like think of it as like a knock tool. It could be even used for fabric. I know I've used it in the past for like we had like UCS chassis and
Mhm.
UCS servers with fiber connected fabrics. And so it's kind of made to manage all those Cisco endpoints throughout your network fabric. Uh, my hope here is that most of these are internally deployed, right? Um, I don't know what the public availability is of these, how many of these systems are available online, but I hope they're mostly internal. So hopefully we don't see a big impact from this.
We would hope so, but we, we've seen that not be the case before.
For sure. Yeah, for our listeners, right? So maybe think about things we've talked about before and actually we were just talking about last week why having that external footprint is so important. So make sure if you have this available on the internet, I'd take it off.
Yep.
And if you feel like there's a need for this to be on the internet, there probably isn't. There's probably a better solution like using VPN to control the access to that system. And then also, even if it is internal, if you have an attacker on your network, it could still be vulnerable. And so the other things like we talked about last week, make sure you're controlling that egress from that server as well. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, good stuff for sure. And hopefully our listeners will get on that. Yeah. So I guess the news story I was going to talk about today is there was this actually came out from a few different sources, and it's nothing new. But Microsoft released a pretty good article on the observations of attackers using an attacker in the middle phishing sites as entry points for that are used later for financial fraud. So essentially, the way this works is it all starts with a phishing email. Um, Attacker will send a phishing email. The observations they shared with us, the phishing email contains like a voicemail link. We've all seen those. I've seen those. I'm sure you have too,
Mhm.
Brad.
Yep.
And when they try to open that voicemail link, or the voicemail attachment. It's actually an HTML attachment. It's going to route them to a page that looks like a login for O365 or whatever the target is. In this situation, it was O365. Realistically, though, that's essentially a proxied site that's in the middle. And so the attacker is proxying the connections from our victim to the Microsoft 365 environment. And through proxying that connection, they're able to obviously steal the authentication credentials, but they're also able to establish that initial session with successful authentication. So even if there's MFA, put in your MFA code, the attacker proxies that through. And then at that point, the attacker is able to get a session cookie that's valid and establish a connection. So attackers are using this as a way to bypass MFA. We talk about that. MFA isn't a silver bullet. This is a good highlight of why it's not a silver bullet. So just be aware of that. Make sure you're training your users on how to identify and report those phishing emails. The other thing to be aware of here too is that I know that in 365 Defender, they do have the ability to detect stolen session cookie replays. So if you have 365 Defender, make sure you have that tuned and you're watching for those alerts and responding to those alerts if you see them. But in this case, this particular article highlights 365, but this particular attack can be used against anything.
Right.
And so just want to make sure you're aware of this attack. Like I said, it's nothing new. It's a new play on an old trick. But make sure you're aware of that and you're trying to properly defend.
Yeah, that was a really good, very in-depth article. I was really,
Yeah.
I'm impressed. What
Yeah.
jumped out at me is based on the threat data, based on the threat data, the attacker in the middle phishing campaign attempted to target more than 10,000 organizations since September of 21. So,
Yeah.
like, not even a year. That's a lot.
It is. It's a lot. Can't say I'm surprised by that, just the volume of incidents we see as a result of phishing campaigns. But it was interesting to see that number actually being tracked with some data behind it.
Nice to see. So cool, good article.
Yeah,
today,
for sure.
We're going to dig into how do we secure the workforce, because I think we're seeing that remote work is here to stay. I don't think that you're going to see people back in the office like they were prior to the pandemic. I just think that's the reality at this point. And it seems like some of the bigger tech companies haven't embraced that. So we know everyone went from in the office to how do we survive and have everyone work remotely? So kind of survival mode. Now that things have leveled out and kind of settled down, what can we do to protect the environment?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I don't think we'll ever go back to a pre-COVID workforce where it was predominantly in office for most of the time. And I will say, like in our field, and security and technology in general, for me, like work from home wasn't a new thing. But this COVID obviously forced everyone into that remote work from home posture to be able to stay operational. And now we're seeing, like you said, that we learned a lot about humans and business throughout that exercise, right? We learned that humans are reliable. They're fully capable to work from home. They're driven. They're trustworthy. And so that's great. And then I think that organizations also learned a lot about this, those same things, but that we don't have to spend the money on the real estate. Maybe we thought we had to spend that money on before. And so because of that, I think we're here to stay. And while it's not probably going to be fully remote for every organization is different. Even those organizations that still require an office, I think are going to continue to adopt that hybrid approach, right? So they do have remote capabilities when things like this arise. And so I think that the threats and the risks that presented themselves to us during the COVID era, they're definitely here to stay. And so instead of being in that phase where I feel like, for me, the beginning was like, oh man, we have to respond. We're forced to respond. And that was like the first 3 to 4 months, right? And it's like, get everybody home. And then the next like 3 to 24 months, we're like, all right, well, how do we just stay afloat? How do we maintain and get through this? And
Right.
now we're at a point where it's like, okay, we're starting to understand this is not going away, and we've learned how to stay afloat. Now let's really focus on becoming secure and efficient and effective in all of these methodologies that we put into place during the COVID era.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And we do have on FRSecure's website, there's a remote work policy template. So I think it's pretty good. Not that I'm biased. I just want to kind of talk through some of these things and explain why that it is so important. Um, you know, things around. Let's start with internet connection. Do you have anything around what wireless codes should they be wired? How are you protecting uh, all these now entry points into your network? Whereas before it was, all coming through, a firewall, but it was inside. Now it's all remote coming in.
Yeah, it was a total shift, right? And we have to figure out there's a lot to unpack and in the technology space for sure. I do want to bring up one point before we dig into this, and something that I was just thinking about because we have this opportunity to talk to people. And one thing that, like, I was just thinking about our show today, our topic, and thinking about these newly introduced risks, and really, we tend to focus on that technology side, which is, the well, I hesitate when I say the biggest piece, but one of the biggest pieces, the human side, right, is
Mm-hmm.
also to me the bigger piece.
True.
And another thing that I think about, just because we talk about this a lot on here, and I think it's important that people continually keep this in front of mind, is that this post-COVID world, forced isolation. We understand that, right? And through this forced isolation, and even people that continue to work in a remote workforce maybe have less socialization than they used to before. And as we've seen correlating to that is our depression, our anxiety, mental
Yeah.
health issues are consistently on the rise, right? And so I would like to start maybe saying, like, hey, let's all keep that in mind, and let's think about as employers, as leaders in our organizations, even as security staff in your organization, putting that at front of mind. We're thinking about securing our environment, and the reason being is that a mentally healthy employee makes better decisions, right? A mentally
Absolutely.
healthy employee is able to identify things more clearly, maybe see these potential phishing attacks like we were just talking about, understand what they should do and respond. And so I think that's a big front of mind thing for me when I think about
True.
how do we make this last long term, how do we keep it secure, is like, let's put some focus as leaders and as businesses to say, let's keep our folks healthy, let's keep a check on our folks, and make sure we're providing those support programs for them, so they feel like they, uh, you know, are in a good state of being.
Yeah. Oh, excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up. And I would like to frame what we're going to talk about as helping your employees. Right. It's not that
Hmm.
they don't want to do the right thing, but have you provided them the information and
Right.
knowledge to do the right thing?
Have you provided to also, have you listened to their challenges?
Right.
Right? So it's, easy sometimes for us. I'm guilty of this. I think we all are, to be like, well, why didn't you do this? I gave you the information. You should have been able to do this. But on the
Right.
flip side, not really listening to the challenges of why they weren't able to achieve those things. And so I think to, kind of curb that and effectively control that, it's about that culture, that communication, and really listening to your workers and understanding what their challenges may be that prevent them from working effectively, communicating effectively, because all of those things can build upon stresses that can
Mhm.
cause those individuals to find themselves later in a poor state of mind or poor state of mental health.
Yeah. No, excellent. And yeah, yeah, we've seen this a lot. We get how many? We just had a question earlier this week from a company that went with. They said, "Well, just use your home device
Hmm.
and dial in." Well, that's all kinds of risky because you have no control over patching, who's using it, do
Hmm.
they even have it, endpoint protection in place? And now they're like, "Well, what do we do? Because we don't want to send laptops out to everyone."
Yeah.
So, what are the options? And how, like you said, how do we enable our employees to do their work and do their job
Hmm.
without negatively impacting them? So,
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe we would start like breaking down some of those things, right? Like we hear other folks who did that didn't have mobile hardware to send everybody home
Yeah.
with, and so they said if you've got a device, use your device for work. That's obviously a huge risk that was introduced into our environments, and people have a hard time responding to that. I know we were talking about this recently, but like, there are mobile device management solutions out there
Mm.
that can help folks manage those endpoints. And a lot of people think mobile device management's only phones, right? But it's not. There's good MDM software solutions out there today that'll help you manage your desktops, regardless of the OS and the
Right.
flavor, as along with those cell phones.
Well,
And
and yeah,
so,
laptops are mobile, right?
yeah,
People forget that.
yeah, 100%, yeah. And people think, well, too, like, well, it's their device. I can't force that. But on the flip side, if this is your workforce and this is your policy, and people are accepting a position with you, and that's a requirement that you bring BYOD and bring your own device, with the caveat, if you want to work for us, we deploy our MDM software to manage your device effectively. And as long as that's stated up front and that's understood by both parties in that situation, then I don't think there's too much legal red tape or ethical red tape even to work through if it's understood during that
Oh,
process.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just make sure you've got a signature and everybody understands what that
Mhm.
means.
Now, I'm not saying that's the solution I recommend, right? I do recommend having business owned and controlled devices. But if you are in that situation where you don't have the budget, maybe, and you have adopted a similar method, look at some MDM solutions to try to help secure those
And,
devices and
yeah,
look at getting
containerize it.
acceptance, yeah, from your employees to be able to do that.
Yeah, so excellent points. And kind of going back to this, when we look at internet connection, again, really what we're looking at is providing those guidelines for the employees. It's, hey, don't use split tunneling. We're trying to protect you. How do you protect yourself? It's a lot more uh, useful information rather than thou shalt not, those types of things. It's, hey, please use this. Um,
Hmm.
you know, it's got requirements around what should be, how you should be securing your devices, right? Having an antivirus, a local firewall, uh, disk encryption, screen locks, best practices at work that maybe aren't thought about at home.
Yeah, I think that this is twofold again, right? So half of it is our security team and our infrastructure team, right? And making sure that we're setting up and controlling those access points properly and securely. The other half is really going back to things we've talked about on here before, but that culture of security and educating your end users, right? Making sure they
Yep.
understand what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. And I think that we talk about this a lot too, but the idea of not just giving them a thing to do, here's a training, do your training. I've done my training. I can now remotely work, but helping them understand the impacts and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes helping them understand the impacts through personal experiences or through how it may impact their personal lives even outside of work is a good way to make that information relatable and understandable for those employees.
Yep.
So they're thinking about themselves when they're thinking about the impact now, and they're also thinking about your business because we're helping develop good habits and good security mindsets.
Right.
And if you can teach people why that's important and help them create habits. It's really to me what it's about, creating habits, good habits. Those good habits will bleed back into your business as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we prior to the pandemic, we always said, you know, train your employees. Their bad habits at home from cyber hygiene are going to come to work. So, if you now the line has been blurred, so their bad
Hmm.
habits at home are at work.
Hmm.
So let's help educate them. We always say one of the best, or a sign of a good security program is you start getting more reported suspected events from your users.
Hmm.
And people say, why is that? Because they're thinking about it.
Yeah, it shows
Like,
that, like it
they're
shows so many
aware.
things, right? They're able to identify it. They actually know what to do when they identify
Mhm.
it. They're not afraid of retribution, and then they care enough to report
Right.
it. Those are really important things. When you start seeing those reports go up, it means that it's working, whatever you're doing. Your culture is
Right.
working, your education is working. We want to see those things.
Well, and selfishly, from a security standpoint or an IT standpoint, I'd rather spend 10, 15 minutes investigating something and going, nope, all good, don't worry about it, thank you for reporting it, than recovering from a ransomware attack because somebody didn't think to report it.
Yeah, 100%. That's the thing. Like, I think a lot of people are afraid of that retribution. I made a mistake. I'm gonna get in trouble for this, so I don't report it. And then it turns to
Oh,
a big event later, and then yeah, what could have
yeah,
been, like Brad said, 10 to 15 minutes, or maybe even a few hours in the beginning, because maybe they were compromised. Maybe they were victim to this AITM attack we
yeah,
were just talking about. Okay, let's go reset all your sessions. Let's reset um, all your accounts, kill any active sessions, kill those cookies that are out there and those tokens, and let's just do a quick review of your system. Maybe let's just rebuild your system even, right? Maybe
right,
we're looking at 3 to 4 hours of work, maybe at
right,
most here. Worse on the flip side, if the attacker is successful, let's don't even think about the ransom. They just were able to use that access for a BEC, business email
yeah,
compromise, to
right,
extract
sure.
a large sum of fraudulent funds from your organization. The amount of work that's going to take to resolve that is going to far exceed what that initial investigation response would be.
Right. Yeah, I never understood the approach of shaming when somebody did that. I mean, it's just so counterproductive.
Yeah,
Like,
and it is, and
everybody makes mistakes. It's not like
yeah,
I've never met a user that's intentionally and maliciously clicked a phishing email.
right. And I've never met anyone who hasn't been a victim before. If we're all honest with ourselves, I mean,
Right.
throughout my life, I know I've been a victim before. It's human. Like, to err is human, and that's okay.
Right.
The error is not the problem; it's the response to the error that we
Yeah.
have to focus on.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
excuse me. Wow, I'm losing my voice again. Um, Yeah, so really, when you look at this checklist, we've talked about your internet, your wireless, helping making sure that it is secure. Things that people don't think about: how far away from the house does or your apartment does that wireless go? Because we all know wireless is not 100% secure. It can be cracked. So, do you even know, what we call wireless bleed, where it goes? Did you think of that? Excuse me.
Yeah, I think that document's really good. I would encourage everybody to, if you haven't looked at that template, get the template and
Yeah,
review the template. Um, there's just going to be a lot of good information there for, like, the um, configuration of your systems, your network, training. You can use a lot of the points in here and tips in here to use
yeah,
that to train your employees on how to think securely, how to work at home better. I think another resource that we have that should definitely make sure everybody understands too is S2Me. It's
yeah,
fantastic, and I know we've talked about that before, but um, it's a really good tool that I would encourage everybody who's in a hybrid situation today, or in a work from home situation still today, to have your users go through S2Me and take it serious, teach them why it's important. And that's going to cover a whole lot of what their responsibility is at the end of the day. If
mm,
they can really buy into that and make those improvements, they're going to be recommended through that program.
yeah. I know that uh, my son's principal went did the S to me and came back and was like, "Whoa, I had no idea. It was mind blowing."
Yeah.
Right? The air quote normal people don't think this way. They don't think about, well, why does my dishwasher need Wi-Fi? Right?
Hmm.
They're just like, cool, whatever. What challenge does that present? So,
Right.
it really is education and just changing how people think, how they perceive what's going on around
Hmm.
them. Situational awareness.
Yeah, I think this is, like, even though it's a challenge for everybody, it presents an opportunity that, as an information security professional, in some way I can say I'm happy about, because in years past, we go pre-COVID again, um, buying was the most difficult thing, and helping
Mm-hmm.
end users understand why security is important, why you have to um, make decisions a specific way to protect yourselves, your business, and so on. And like we've said before, we've known for a long time bad habits at home extend to the workplace. But before, the workplace was never at home. So we didn't really have an
Right.
opportunity to kind of step into that realm and say, we have a responsibility now because you are from your house and you're connecting to my business. So it gives us that opportunity to shift our education outside of the walls of our business to kind of a no boundary society anymore. So we can use this as an opportunity, right, to help influence, spread this mindset, and help educate more people and get more buy-in, I believe, because of that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the reality is, if you have a user who gets their bank account compromised and it gets emptied out, they're not going to be functional at work, right? So yeah, it is about the people. You want to protect them,
Hmm.
and obviously there's always the business perspective in the back of your mind, right? Just the reality of how things are. But I want I want my people to be happy. I want them to be able to focus. Like, it goes back to the mental health, right?
Hmm.
If they're stressed out about something because they weren't aware of it, or you didn't take the opportunity to educate them, and now it's happened. Honestly, that's a failure on security side, not on your end user.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think we have to accept responsibility um, for some of those things and try to influence, right? Educate and influence. I think
Right.
too, there's some other like risks that really are even outside of our guide that we should talk through, and
Sure.
so people can think about, right? And so we talk about how to securely manage that access, how to manage your endpoint securely through different products and tools. We can get into the patching, the EDR, and all those things are really, really important, right? And hopefully everybody knows that nothing changed when you went home. Like, you still got to patch, you just got to make sure EDR is up to date, your endpoint detection. You have to make sure you're monitoring the activity on there. You still have to make sure you're monitoring the activity in and out of your network. It's all the same, just a different space. But another challenge, for folks that they may not be thinking about, if you're forced or you're staying in the hybrid or the remote policy, is what's your backup plan? Like, what are you going to do? And I'm not talking about your physical back or your data backup plan, but what's your operational plan whenever your VPN goes down or there's a severe outage affecting your network? Um,
Great point.
and I don't have the answers for that. Everybody's going to be different, right? But these are things I would encourage folks to start thinking about in that new world. How do we introduce redundancy into our remote workforce connectivity? You know, um,
Right.
and so think about that, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, how many people have gone back and revised their DR BCP
Hmm.
since the change? My guess is probably not
Yeah,
a whole lot.
right. They probably haven't had time. That's understandable. Like, now
Right.
we're reaching the normalization phase, and it's an opportunity for you to revisit those plans and make sure that you're going to identify deficiencies in your new workforce, right? And
Sure.
that's okay. Now, make
It's
sure
normal.
that we're building that roadmap to fix those deficiencies long term.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
another thing that people should think about too is, and it's a challenge, a much bigger challenge, is making sure um, you're implementing proper segmentation, right? And we're talking a lot about software segmentation now because you're likely using virtual desktop environments or using VPN connections. And I think a lot of people probably, and based on things I've seen, when they were forced to quickly stand up the VPN, they secure the VPN, they put the MFA on there, they're monitoring that access, but they didn't take the time to implement those segmentation rules and the
Yeah.
appropriate groups to access to appropriate assets and so on. So I think that's probably a big to do still hanging out there for a lot of people, that I would say now's the time to go back and revisit that along with your BCP and DRP. And hopefully those
Yeah.
exercises will help you uncover even more things that you need to shore up at this point.
Well, and you know, to that one, I mean, we still see that even before everybody went remote. It was rare to see the VPN segmented separately, right? It just comes in and yeah, you're at the data center. You can do what you got to do, because it was hard to segment properly. So they're just like, whatever.
And I think too, probably before it was the VPN had a lower population of users,
Yeah,
right?
very true.
So maybe it was reserved for more technical staff, security staff, and likely executives. And so then it suddenly shifted where we said, hey, everybody's got to be on the VPN. And so the segmentation control got placed a little further on the priority line than getting the VPN functional, securing the VPN, and so on. And also, I think that we saw a lot of people, and this kind of goes back to my first point, when they made that shift, your VPN in the beginning may have been, you know, built for capacity realistically of 10 to 20 users, but you load that VPN up with 50 to 60 users. And so when I talk about, again, those other challenges in the workforce, we should listen to our employees about. One of those things is just performance. Like, how is this remote
Yeah.
strategy working for you? And looking at things like, do I have bottlenecks that I've presented during this time period that I need to go back and revisit now? Now I'm in normalization phase, and make a plan to increase those resources, or whatever that may be. Maybe it's your
Right.
circuit, maybe it's the network infrastructure, maybe it's the firewall. I don't know, but at least doing studies on ourselves to understand how effectively our technology is working is going to be really important in keeping um, a workforce that's happy, able to work, and is efficient. Right.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And, if you were one of those that didn't segment before, this is a great opportunity to justify the work, right? Hey, we've got to do this now that things are settled. This isn't going to change. Let's take the time and do it correctly.
hmm Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree. I think that like for everybody listening, right, check out our remote work policy template for sure. Do that. If we're having takeaways, I would also say be aware of mental health of all your employees. Keep that front of mind always, and give them the support they need, and listen to them for their challenges that they may present, right? And then revisit those BCPs, those DRPs, like we talked about, because they have changed now, 100%. And then another point we haven't talked about yet, but is pulling a third party, right? Bring someone in to assess your organization right now. Make
yeah,
sure that you, because it's normal to need help, to have gaps. We can't see the forest for the trees sometimes. So bring someone in to help you, someone you trust, and assess and test, and then rinse and repeat, right?
yeah, and it's so hard to do that assessment yourself a lot of times because you are head
hmm
down trying to keep things functional.
Yep.
So have somebody come in with a clean set of eyes that has the knowledge and capacity to help you identify those risks. Good,
hmm
good point.
Yeah. Another point too, like in the beginning, I was thinking about this, that we did see a huge rise in the frequency of significant incidents after that home shift, right? And we blamed a lot of that, and a lot of it was because of force at home, insecure configurations, misconfigurations, all those good things, right? But I was thinking about this too, and I think another real reality of why that happened, and I think this again ties back to my first point, is that we just quickly introduced communication barriers. Where, Brad, you're next door to me, and before, if you sent me an email saying, "Hey, here's, I need you to go log in and fill out this
Mhm.
document, blah blah blah," I could have knocked on your door, walked over, and said, "Hey, man, I didn't know you were sending me this. Did you send me this?" Right? No, I didn't send you that. Oh shoot, this is a phishing attempt. Whereas now we're isolated, we're at home. It's a lot harder to just quickly check and make sure that that communication was valid. And so I think there was an increased risk of fraud and successful phishing attacks and compromised accounts. Again, not necessarily because of anything we configured wrong, but more so of this is the new normal, right? And so this is why we
Yeah.
have to shift our thinking and help
Well,
improve communications, streamline communications, and education, right?
yeah. Well, and not going off of that as well. How much of it was because of burnout and fatigue of staff that were
hmm
before there and being able to support and notice these things versus I'm just trying to keep the doors open, so to speak, keep the lights on,
Yeah,
and you miss those things that you normally would have caught before.
yeah, 100%.
So awesome. Well, hopefully this was helpful for everyone. Like I said, there is on our website the remote work policy template. Take a look at it. Um, hopefully it helps you out. Any shout outs this week, Oscar?
Um, yeah, I'm gonna give a shout out. Let me think here. I'm gonna give a shout out to my wife. She's awesome. I've shouted her out before, but she continues to be awesome. And my best bud, we're gonna go to Mexico this weekend and visit with Evan. Super excited about that, and
Nice.
so we're getting excited about our trip. And yeah, shout out to my lovely lady. How
Yeah,
about you?
I was gonna say this is probably, I don't know, 165, 170 episodes that I've co-hosted or hosted, and you would think at this point I would have thought of a shout out prior to, like, oh hey, yeah, it's time for shout outs, but I'll do my wife as well. Shout out to her. She's just awesome, just so supportive and helpful. We're not going to Mexico, unfortunately, but it's gonna be nice here this weekend, hopefully, and yeah, just awesome.
Yeah, heck yeah! Shout out to our better half, right?
The only reason we're still around.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, well, with that, we will wrap up episode 185 and talk to you all again next week.